So thanks very much for coming to this session on the Human Interface project. My name is Philip Sheldrake. I'm an engineer by training. I've just started a PhD for my sins at Southampton on the SOCIAM project, which is the social machines project run between Southampton, Oxford and Edinburgh. The HYPE project has been going for 2 years. We have the endorsement of the Web Science Trust and the support of an engineering firm called Lenaro in Cambridge, who are a non-profit open source software company. Check them out, lenaro.org. But let me dive in and see if I can convey why I think the HYPE project might contribute to today's decentralization conversation. So I guess what I would start with is saying that decentralization cannot be marketed. I don't know if you've ever tried to convey to a non-specialist, a non-geek, for want of a better term, why a distributed, decentralized network is superior than a centralized one. Has anybody tried that and failed miserably? Yeah, right. Because we don't understand their domain of expertise. They don't understand our domain of expertise. And yet we all know that a sustainable network, as nature has shown over and over again, is a distributed network. So if we can't market decentralization, if we can't rip them away from the comfort, the convenience of centralized services, then we need to tease them away in some other way. And that generally, in good old-fashioned marketing terms, means to give them something that they value, that's compelling. Right? So let's see if we've done that with the HYPE project. We've got 3 overarching aims. The first is to contribute to solving the aspect of personal data and privacy. The second is about transforming accessibility and digital inclusion. Because a sustainable network requires participation, right? So unless people are actively participating, then we haven't got a sustainable distributed network. And the last is secure a citizen-centric internet, which in today's terminology at this conference means decentralized, or even further, entirely distributed. And so, as you saw from the previous slide, what we actually think is the first 2 can be the value proposition, which leads us to the third. And all of this is an open non-profit that purely has the vision that the Web Foundation expresses in mind, which is to make the web available, usable and valuable for everyone. You can hypothesize that when we approach digital, we just digitalize the analog, right? Because that's all we knew before. That's all we had to go on, which is why we made the huge leap from mail to email. It's just got an E on the front of it, right? Other than that, it's much the same looking thing. We went from having, in the old days, files, desktops and folders, and then we ended up with files, desktops and folders, because that's what we know. And it takes several decades to try and discover the unprecedented qualities of digital. So this is a machine. This is a machine that inspired and contributed to the Industrial Revolution. It's a physical machine, and therefore it has a physical interface. And when we digitalized machines, we digitalized the interface. The one machine has the one interface to however many users and operators it may have. And we have these things called servers today, which present one interface to the 10,000, 10 million people using it. But because it's non-physical, that's bonkers. That doesn't need to be the case anymore. We can actually think of the interface simply as something that sits between the human and the machine, and therefore, metaphorically, if you like, move it away from the machine towards the entities that actually count in all of this, which is you, me, and the other billions of people on the planet. So we end up with a way comparing UI and HI. And if you don't mind, I will go through this line by line, if only because they are really important to try and convey the difference. So first of all, a claim that the UI is a 20th century construct, perfectly suited to 20th century computing. By inference, it's not suited to the pervasive digital environment of the 21st century. The UI is up close to the machine by definition, right? Whereas the HI is up close to the individual. Again, I would just stress, they're the entities that matter in all of this. The UI team, doesn't matter how awesome that UI team is, occasional bits of personalization aside, they can only really design an interface for the average user. I don't know about you, but I'm not average. You're not average. No one is average, right? We've all got unique qualities. We've all got unique skills. We've all got unique disabilities, numeracy, literacy, visual numeracy. And so this is interesting because the UI used to be the organizations, because the organization only used to have the funds and the skills to develop UI. Whereas actually the HI belongs to you. The user must fit to the machine in the old day. Now we want to fit the product to the individual. Ergonomicists have understood this for years. They've always talked about fitting the task to the man rather than the man to the task. We can do this now. The UI provides interactive information, but genuinely, now that the HI is yours and resides with you, it can actually go further than just providing information. It can help you build self-knowledge. And when we first started to talk about and evangelize the HI project, we kept coming up against those who actually do work in UI or with people in UI, and there's this maxim that's been going around for 2 or 3 decades: the interface is the product. And we did actually struggle for a response to that for some time, actually, because it's quite a strong maxim, until we realized actually that the product is the product. I don't know about you, but I'd rather my bank focused on banking and my medical services focused on medical excellence, and then the rest of us and the broader open community can work out the UI stuff, right? Let's play to our core competencies. So from the 90s, you can think of these organizations presenting apps and websites to us. From the noughties, we had some companies who were very keen to set themselves up in the middle there, if only because we're not the customer, we're the product, and there's money to be made. From the 10s, preaching to the converted at Redecentralize London, right? The interface has moved over to the entities that actually count, so that the organizations are extending an API to our HI, or, in the longer term, an open data platform construct along the lines of Solid. So we become a Trojan horse, if you like, to encourage people to wean themselves off proprietary API, standardized API, towards an open data platform. I should come clean at this point and say we haven't written a line of code yet. We're in the process of raising foundation money. As you can imagine, when we speak to the investment community, they would like equity, and being an open non-profit, we can't give them equity, so that's usually where the conversation stops. So at the moment, we're now talking to foundations in order to raise $1 million to build a proof of concept, by which I mean code on GitHub and explain a video so that we can continue to grow and build our community. But we do know what the technology looks like. We reimagine the UI as a lightweight artifact that can be shared within a community-based ecosystem. So we're decentralizing the way in which we go about presenting interfaces. And they can be hosted on the individual's own devices as an application. They can be pluggable components of a custom browser, or integrated within web applications provided by third parties. And what's important here is that we give everybody in that ecosystem the opportunity to freely copy, modify, and share those components. So now we've got a situation in Europe, for example, where the General Data Protection Regulation is wending its way through the legislature. It's now irreversible. It will become law. Something called the GDPR will be ratified in the next quarter or two. And then it will roll out to all 28 countries in the EU within 2 years, by law. The GDPR basically says to organisations that do business with any one of the 500 million people who live in the EU that the human is actually, the individual is at the centre of these things. The citizen is at the centre of your business, and you need to respect that. What's interesting about the GDPR is it demonstrates that our democratic representatives get what's been going on and want to try and fix it, and they've reached in their tool bag and found that they only have one tool, which is regulation, and it's a rather blunt instrument. So they're wielding this tool, and they're just about to enshrine regulation for which there is no technological answer. And I don't know whether organisations can say, but there's no technological way we can comply with this, as an excuse for not complying. So we're saying that actually the High Project is a way to comply. Let me give you an example. The cookie law. Here, every time I go to a website and we see a little warning come up saying, this site uses cookies, no kidding, right? I mean, we need cookies, right? Now, depending on which statistics you look at, about 1.5% of cookies are for legitimate reason, and 98.5% of them are there to try and surveil what you do on the web in order to market to you, right? So there's, if you want to polarize it, good cookies and bad cookies. But the idea that we should all have to click yes, 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 it's called meaningless compliance. And what we don't want is meaningless compliance with the GDPR and similar regulation around the world. What we actually want is, rather than a company saying, well, we've asked them what their privacy settings want to be, we've asked them, oh, by the way, we interpreted the GDPR in our way, and we handed it to our UI team, who interpreted it in their way, so that now the individual citizen in the EU, who deals with 2, 3, 4 dozen different organisations in their digital life, is presented with 2, 3, 4 dozen different ways to comply with the GDPR. We're building ourselves up for meaningless compliance. So these companies have invested millions in their back end, extending a bridge, if you like, out to the citizen. They'd like to be in your living room, in your car, in your pocket, in order to understand you better. What we're saying is, collectively, we want to invest the same amount of money in each of these citizens to allow them to bridge back. Because if the citizen has half the bridge coming back, and these companies are bridging out towards you, there's the opportunity to create mutual understanding based on mutually agreed terms to build mutual value faster than otherwise. So we think this is a response to GDPR compliance and similar regulation around the world. There are 3 parts to the project. The first is to develop the framework, and by that I mean exactly what are the nuances of how the high engine, the piece of software that powers your human interface, how will that work? What kind of components and methods will it look for, and then when it's found them, how will it then assemble them on the fly, in the context, understanding your numeracy, your literacy, the fact that it's Friday night and you want to know how much money you can spend on beers, as opposed to Sunday morning when you want to do regression analysis on your household finance, right? I mean, your needs change. But your own needs change during the week, let alone from one person to another. So that needs to be detailed. And as Dame Professor Wendy Hall described it, this is more of a journey rather than a destination, by the way. We don't have to boil the ocean, we just have to do slightly better than the current status. Then we have to develop the software, and then the open community can develop the components that it calls upon. Let me give you an example about this. This really, I got stuck on a train station in Italy. There was a strike, right? No trains. And I had no choice really but to wait it out, and I happened to find myself sitting next to a professor at a UK university who specialises in household finance. How do the 20 million households in UK approach balancing their budget? It's a good question. And then she told me this shocking fact. It was shocking to me anyway. There are households in the UK who think that the APR of a loan, the higher the APR, the better the product. Right? Let me just say that again. The higher the cost of the loan, the better the product. There are people out there who think that because they haven't got necessarily the numeracy or the literacy to understand differently. We are letting them down. We need to extend them an interface that allows them to understand the decisions that they're making in order that they can participate in society more ably, more readily. I'm not going to design the components to help that household understand that a higher APR is a more costly product. There are people out there whose expertise that is that we need to call on to help develop the methods and components that the individual's high engine can then call on in order that they can understand that. And we didn't want to do just blue sky thinking with the high project. We wanted to make sure it would happen. And I worked with Mozilla from Firefox 0.7. I can't remember what version number it was when I finished working with them after about 7 or 8 years. And I can tell you now, trying to get a web user to stop clicking on the blue E, as we used to call it at the time, Internet Explorer, and use Firefox instead, is incredibly hard work to get people to change their habits one by one. And yet, we all in this room know the benefits that society at large can accrue from a decentralized network. So we want to get this out there as quickly as possible. So we're intent on making sure that the High project is good for business. Just because we're a non-profit open project doesn't mean it shouldn't be commercially advantageous to organizations out there to think, right, okay, I'm a challenger brand. I've got some big tier 1 people I'm trying to, nick some market share off. I've got limited resources, but where can I get this advantage? With the opportunity to extend an HI rather than a UI, they can do so with zero capex, because we're building this without them having to put any capital in. It'll have lower operating expenses than it costs them to maintain their suite of UI today. It shows their customers the respect of learning their proclivities, their needs, their accessibility requirements, their numeracy, their literacy. The tier 1 people with their massively invested suite of UI can't hope to compete with our open distributed community enabling this. Can't. Eventually, just as we saw with walled gardens, for example, when a challenger brand pulls walled garden down, everyone else has to follow. When a challenger brand in every sector offers HI instead of UI, everyone else has to follow. And when I'm getting HI from my bank, and I'm getting HI from my mortgage company, and I'm getting HI from my insurance company, now I'm no longer interacting organisation by organisation. I'm now looking at my household finance. I'm looking at my situation, because all that data can be brought in collectively and gives me a picture on my financial health, on my physical health, on my mental well-being. Whatever facet of your life that's important to you. So that's the pitch. We seed HI with the customers of challenger brands. And they don't necessarily know that they were having a UI on a Friday and now it's Monday morning and suddenly they've got HI. They don't need to know that. To them it just works the same way as always. Got a couple more slides, but I thought at that point I would just pause because I would realise I've probably just been evangelising and sort of talking at you for a while about the High project, and I'd like to use this moment, given your background, given your knowledge, given that you're here at Redecentralize, I'd love to find out what you make of the High project as you've learned about it so far. Tell me what you like about it, that's always good. But also see if you've spotted anything that we need to take into account as we continue to make this happen. A hand up at the back first, please. Hi.
Hi.
Come on down so we can all hear you.
I'll project from here. I think it's a really brilliant idea, just having the person at the centre as kind of the promise of digital. What I couldn't understand from the description was whose job is it to configure the user experience of this. So one of the reasons UIs and walled gardens work is because they present through central control a fairly, yes, generic,
it's a beautiful question, if I may say so, and one we are grappling with. We think we have the scope of an answer. There you go, that's me caveating my response already. We know that you have a different answer personally to that question to my mum. And so actually we have to be all things to all people. We have to give you the facility to just ignore everything and just see where it goes. There's a little bit of implicit learning your understanding. You might express on one surface a desire for pie charts versus a table of data. And it would be silly of us not to pick up that preference and apply it to other situations. So you effectively teach your version of a human interface what you like, and we learn from that. So that's, if you like, implicit training. But we should also give you the facility to be explicit, to say exactly how you'd like things to be. So for example, you might be straight up front in the preferences section and say, I've got colour blindness. And it's this kind of colour blindness. Now we know not to show these two colours side by side in order to show a difference, because you can't perceive one. So, does that answer your question? It's almost like I'm answering your question by saying, yeah, we're trying to do it all.
So, and that's a bit confusing me slightly. So, so if I'm a new user to HI, am I right in understanding that my first experience will be probably no different from my current UI, and then over time it changes?
Yes, it should improve. We don't see the need to be suddenly much better than UI on the Friday, HI on the Monday. We just have to be as good as, maybe a little bit better. At that point, we can then progress together. But remember, you're not a user of HI. In our architecture, there is no user. We want to resign that word to history. You are a citizen, you are a human. And this is your software, that's your agency in the digital world. Hi, Henry.
You were saying, you're saying you're looking for prototypes, I think, and I can help you with existing prototypes of this type of already. So you
That'd be fantastic.
A year.
That sounds good to me.
Because you can, we have prototypes of this in solid with the data being served on the server, and then the application is just reading the data. And people, so there's still the whole thing about how you write an API so that different groups of organizations can write different types of applications with different types of data. That's totally, yeah. Next.
Yeah, brilliant.
So the thing, to answer that question also, you can think of it a little bit as in the long term, the desktop ends up being replaced completely, right? Because currently you buy applications. Well, you go to Apple Store and you download applications from Apple Store. Right? This currently this data. If you imagine that this is now all your applications on your computer using data from thousands of sites across the web, every application becomes a web app. This is what the people at Netscape were so excited about in the late 80s before they really got messed up by Microsoft and the REST page. The original idea was that the desktop becomes, every single application desktop becomes a web application. It's becoming more and more. And so yeah, when you go to the Apple Store, you buy a certain type of application that you select for the type of data that you want to do. Except that here the data will be completely open on the server.
Well, there are two things happening in that space. Firstly, having announced that the web was dead, long live the app. That didn't quite work out wired. We're now having the de-appification of the mobile ecosystem, where instead of, I mean, what amazes me is we've got these incredible supercomputers in our pockets. Just mind-blowing technology. If I knew this was coming when I was 15, right? It was just astonishing. And then you switch it on, and it doesn't represent your life at all. It represents how organizations would like you to see your life in those little silos and icons. So what Google and Microsoft and Apple are trying to do now is to get those services to connect proprietarily in the background in order to give you more of a seamless commentary, interaction with all of those services on their terms, connecting the data and those services in their way, in a black box that we can't see. We want to give organizations an alternative they can support HI rather than be subjugated by a proprietary operating system and a proprietary system, approach to moving those applications, weaving those applications together.
I think it's very well described. It's a good way of describing it.
Thank you.
In the end, you need a database in the operating system, in the browser, the different types of applications you can use to get data from different websites, merge the information, and for the particular use case, show you want to call someone, it finds out that from his profile, some site, he's in Japan, it shows you, wait a minute, he's in Japan, don't call him now, right?
Yeah.
A message, send him an email, that kind of thing.
So the emphasis has been on decentralization, the emphasis has been on personal data, personal knowledge building, but I would just finish just by underlining accessibility as well, based on there are millions of people out there at the moment who cannot interact digitally because they have certain physical problems. And there is no UI team on the planet that can aspire to meet their needs. So we have the support of the Business Disability Forum in the UK, who are saying that with the high architecture, we can transform the lives of many millions of web users, which is really a fantastic thing to try and achieve anyway. Have I got time for one more question? No, I don't think I do. Matan, we'll have to take it up after this. Thank you very much for your interaction, much appreciated. Cheers.